Most pilots have died from the failure of the vacuum pump. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, most of the aviation-related incidents that occurred, especially under broad daylight, is due to pilot error, when the pilots mistakenly control the aircraft into terrain, or maybe mid-air collisions and stuff. Because especially in general aviation, most of these aircraft are, controlled by the old system instruments. But these days, we have the backup electrical instruments as well. In my aircraft, I have the electrical instruments, and I also have the mechanical instruments as well. In this case, I have the dry air vacuum pump, which drives the gyros in my attitude and heading indicator, sucks in air, to control my attitude and heading references. So I have electrical and I have mechanical, so I can never go wrong. I found out my vacuum gauge was reading a 0, and then upon troubleshoot, I realized my filters were good, and then comparing my attitude and heading indicator, I'm talking about the traditional instruments, to the electrical instrument, I found out whenever I am in a turn or in a bank, I realize my traditional instruments are still not showing me, or not giving me any indications, but my electrical instruments were all right. And then I also used my magnetic compass to find out my heading indicator was far off. So I realized it was time to replace my vacuum pump. I removed my vacuum pump from the back of the engine, brought it home, a little sip of drinks, and I'm working this Friday night. I realized the coupler has sheared off, and it was time to replace the coupler. Everything else was good. I took a deep look inside my vacuum pump, and I realized everything was in good shape except the coupler. The coupler has been sheared off. It was designed in such a way that whenever there is a failure in the vacuum pump fails, the coupler is gonna shear off. It's plastic, it's very fragile, so it's just gonna break off. That way the failure of the vacuum pump has no effect on the engine. Like as I said, especially most pilots new to aviation who don't know, who don't have enough training as to how to deal with failure of the vacuum systems, have died. Most of the crashes. Deep investigation from the NTSB website reveals pilots controlling the aircraft into terrain because they don't have references to attitude and heading. Especially on a night flight, it is very, very difficult if you lose your attitude and your heading indicator. So I always advise my colleagues to get a standby electrical instruments. Even if you're gonna fly by the traditional instruments, I like to fly by the traditional instruments, but even if you're gonna do so, you need to, for redundancy purposes, you need to have the electrical version of it. Now everything is out, and I found out I needed to replace the coupler. Now it was time for me to go online and do my research. I went online, I went to Aircraft Spruce website, and then I realized a new vacuum pump was gonna cost me $520. And also, if I decide to overhaul and replace just the sheared off or the broken plastic coupler, that was only gonna cost me $20.85. So if I'm buying a new one, it's $525. And if I am replacing only the plastic coupler, which I found out that was the only broken part inside my vacuum pump, it's gonna cost me $20.85. So in this case, I am saving about $500.